It began where ambition wore suits and deception smiled through polished teeth, inside a company praised for progress, yet hollowed by its own reflection. A genius system, the kind that could shift markets and rewrite digital playbooks, emerged quietly from the hands of someone they never intended to celebrate. He wasn't what the firm wanted in a visionary. His skin too dark for the pedestal, his presence too calm to be feared. So they erased him. Not all at once, but in pieces, slowly and precisely. First his credit, then his voice, and finally his name. But what they didn't realize was this: the silence they mistook for surrender was strategy. And by the time the truth surfaced, it was already too late. If you're drawn to stories where injustice meets its reckoning, where the most underestimated figure becomes the one thing power can't ignore, drop a like, hit subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Let's see who really caught every twist. The Stratagem Solutions quarterly review meetings were infamous for their pressure. 30 executives, managers, and stakeholders filed into the glass conference suite overlooking Midtown like it was a coliseum. The tension in the air was razor sharp. Every click of a pen, every whispered aside carried a weight. Sitting near the far right end of the obsidian glass table, Dorian Shields adjusted his tie, then straightened the neatly tabbed portfolio in front of him. His breathing was steady, but behind his composure churned a storm of preparation, pressure, and cautious optimism. Today was his chance. After months of development, weeks of analysis, and sleepless nights refining data visualizations, Dorian was ready to present his strategy. Not just any strategy, this was a potential market disruptor. An urban-based, mobile-first engagement model designed to reach untapped demographics and reframe their digital footprint. It was bold. It was scalable. It was innovative. But more than anything, it was his. The idea had lived in his mind, grown through his labor, and now it was ready for daylight. Clint Rourke, team lead of North American strategy, entered the room with the arrogance of a man who believed the floor rose to meet his feet. In his mid-40s, Clint carried himself like a locker room captain who'd never retired. Rolled sleeves, polished Rolex, designer loafers with no socks, and a smile that always felt like a challenge. He tossed his tablet on the table, clapped his hands once. "Let's bring this bird in," he barked. "We've got deals to win and dragons to slay, folks." The room gave a polite chuckle. Clint's tone was always performative, but when you controlled the pipeline to senior leadership, people laughed. Even when nothing was funny, Dorian's name was on the agenda, slide 3A, urban market penetration and behavioral strategy. He had double-checked the AV, run his numbers through risk projections twice, and memorized his timing to the second. Clint gestured to him. "Shields, you've been cooking something up, haven't you? Floor's yours." That was the cue. Dorian stood, not too fast, not too eager. He adjusted the clicker in his hand and activated the screen. "Thank you, Clint. Good morning. Over the past 6 months, we've tracked emerging user behavior through micro-content creators in urban corridors. We've identified a key growth sector with high conversion potential for—" "Hold up," Clint said sharply, lifting one finger like a parent silencing a child. The words halted Dorian mid-sentence. The room quieted. Dorian blinked, lips still parted, pointer raised toward a heat map on the screen. Clint leaned back in his chair and gave a condescending smile. "We'll let the adults handle this, yeah?" Nervous laughter cracked the silence. Not hearty, but eager. A few junior managers looked down. One or two smirked, unsure. Dorian lowered the pointer slowly. Clint wasn't finished. "I appreciate the passion, Dorian. Really, I do. But let's not get lost in the Instagram fog. All right? This is the boardroom, not a TED Talk." A more confident laugh followed from someone near the window. Clint stood halfway, pacing a step behind his chair. "Let's keep it real. We don't need urban TikTok trends to drive Q3. We need revenue and scalable, clean solutions, not influencer outreach gimmicks." He chuckled at his own words. What's next? Sponsored barbershop content. That drew a full, open laugh. Clint's smirk grew. "Sorry, but we're not trying to build buzz in the Bronx. Let's refocus." Dorian stood motionless. His entire presentation, 6 weeks of research, thousands of data points, real engagement metrics, was reduced to a punchline in 30 seconds. The screen behind him dimmed. No one intervened. No one asked to hear the rest. He lowered the clicker to the table and sat, slow and mechanical. His chair felt smaller, his breath shallow. His eyes didn't blink for a long time. He could hear Clint transitioning smoothly to the next topic, vendor consolidation. His segment on the agenda was never revisited. For the remaining hour, Dorian said nothing. He took no notes. The graphs on the screen blurred. The voices around him sounded distant. He stared at the line of bottled water in front of him, each one precisely placed, each cap aligned. Everyone around him spoke of synergy and optimization like nothing had happened. When the meeting ended, Clint clapped a hand on someone's back, made a joke about steakhouse reservations, and swaggered out. One of the tech leads mumbled, "Good try, man," and gave Dorian a nod before quickly walking away. Alone, Dorian stayed seated as the chairs emptied around him. He waited until the last person left before standing. In the hallway, his reflection in the glass looked strange, muted, thinned, like a man pulled slightly out of alignment. In the break room, he stood by the vending machines, hand in his pocket, unread messages buzzing against his thigh. One came from Tasha, a junior associate he'd helped during onboarding. "That wasn't fair. I'm sorry. You deserve better." Dorian typed back thanks, then backspaced it letter by letter, then deleted the message. He stared at the blinking cursor for several seconds before powering off the screen. He didn't eat lunch that day. Instead, he sat in his office, lights off, blinds drawn. He replayed Clint's words over and over. "We'll let the adults handle this." Instagram fog. Sponsored barbershop content. The casual cruelty. The ease with which it was said. The applause it drew. Access denied. The words flashed on his screen with robotic indifference. He tried again. Same result. Confused, he checked the network, tried another route, then called IT. The voice on the other end, clearly rushed, mumbled through a response. Yeah, your access has been restricted by admin order." I think it was Clint who flagged it. Dorian froze. "On what grounds?" he asked. "I'm the lead on the Urban Market project." The tech support agent hesitated. "Just following the chain, man. Said you need to earn clearance back through stable performance." Dorian sat back in his chair, stunned. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate. Clint had stripped him of the tools necessary to manage his own campaign, without warning, without cause. He spent the next 2 hours emailing interns for exports of the data he could no longer reach himself. Every message burned his pride. Every delay chipped away at his authority. Colleagues started noticing. The same ones who'd laughed at Clint's joke in the meeting now whispered about how Dorian was falling behind. The gossip slithered through departments like oil on water. By lunchtime, Dorian had to attend a team stand-up meeting in a shared workspace. As he approached his office afterward, something looked off. The brushed metal placard outside his door, once etched cleanly with his name, had been replaced. In its place, "Intern Lounge." Bold black letters. Clear. Permanent looking. A few people nearby stifled laughs. One even took a photo. Dorian stared at the sign for several seconds, jaw tight, eyes narrowed, mind spinning. Was this a prank? A message? He reached out, tugged it off, and carried it directly to HR. The human resources floor was quiet and clinical, all neutral tones and hushed tones. He walked in, holding the nameplate in both hands like evidence. "I need to report an incident," he said to the receptionist. After a short wait, he was ushered into a glass office where a compliance officer named Christine met him with a practiced smile and too calm voice. He placed the sign on her desk. "This was outside my office. Someone changed it. That's not a joke. That's a calculated insult." Christine nodded as if she understood, but her fingers didn't move toward the keyboard. "Have you had any conflicts recently that might have prompted this?" she asked. Dorian blinked, momentarily speechless. "Conflicts? You think I provoked this?" She held up her hand. "I'm just trying to understand the full picture." Sometimes our reaction to workplace dynamics can unintentionally escalate tension. Dorian leaned forward. There is no tension. There is harassment. Public, targeted harassment. Christine offered a strained smile. Perhaps you're reading too much into it. People play pranks all the time around here. You have to understand the culture can be very relaxed. Would someone play a prank like this on Clint? Dorian asked. Or Jason? Or Melissa? She didn't answer. He stood. I want this investigated. We'll make a note of it, she replied. Back at his desk, the silence felt heavier than usual. The walls seemed closer. Every glance from a passing colleague felt laced with curiosity or mockery. He could hear snickers in the hallway as someone whispered, maybe he's getting demoted. Dorian didn't eat that day either. He tried to focus on what he could control, replying to client emails, reviewing metrics sent by interns, updating presentation decks manually. But he couldn't stop thinking about the implications. Clint was more than just a jerk. He was executing a campaign to undermine Dorian's authority in layers. Public humiliation, professional sabotage, silent isolation. It wasn't just disrespect. It was strategic erasure. That evening, as the office lights dimmed and chairs sat vacant under idle monitors, Dorian remained. He stared at his laptop screen, rereading emails from partners who still didn't know his role had been downgraded internally. He considered messaging one, offering a subtle heads-up, something veiled but truthful. But he stopped himself. They wouldn't believe it. Not yet. Not while Clint's voice still held weight. Not while the company still laughed at his expense. Instead, he drafted a report, an internal memo outlining the importance of data security protocols being bypassed in access revocations. He worded it professionally, not as a complaint, but as a concern. He CC'd IT. He CC'd his director. He CC'd HR. No one replied. By the end of the week, Dorian noticed something else. His lunch invite disappeared from the team calendar. His contributions to a new product ideation were credited to a junior associate he'd mentored. His name wasn't on the upcoming pitch meeting for the firm's most important urban client. And still, he said nothing. He wore the same iron suits. He arrived early. He did his job. He smiled when required. He played the game. But the quiet war against him wasn't slowing. It was gaining momentum. On Friday, he stopped by the break room to pour coffee. Behind him, two junior analysts were whispering, unaware he was there. Clint says Shields might be phased out. Says he's not a team player. Well, he always seemed intense. I mean, that intern sign thing was hilarious. Dorian didn't turn around. He filled his cup. He stirred. He left. By Monday morning, the weight of the previous week lingered like fog. Dorian arrived early again, hoping to reclaim some control through discipline and routine. He reviewed the revised slides for the upcoming board preview, double-checked his calculations, and saved backup copies on both the server and a private drive. He wore a deeper gray suit, the kind that made his reflection feel a little steadier. The boardroom was already filling when he entered. Clint stood near the front, laughing with two executives from finance. As Dorian plugged in his laptop, Clint gave him a casual glance and said, "Let's keep this one smooth today, yeah?" Dorian nodded, tight-lipped, and cued the presentation. His name was on the title slide this time, which gave him a small flicker of hope, but it didn't last long. As soon as the first chart appeared on the screen, he knew something was wrong. The axis labels were garbled, showing placeholder text. One graph displayed upside down, another filled with red error symbols. Dorian's chest tightened. He clicked rapidly to advance the slides, each one worse than the last. Images missing. Notes replaced with gibberish. The formatting was destroyed. The room fell into a hush, and all eyes turned to him. Clint folded his arms with theatrical patience. "This the polished version you promised us?" he asked loudly, amusement seeping through his tone. Dorian's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "This isn't the file I saved," he said, voice measured but strained. "Something's corrupted." "I corrupted?" Clint laughed, cutting him off. "Come on, Shields. We've all been in the game long enough to know how to run a presentation. This isn't your first day, is it?" Laughter rumbled through the room. Dorian looked to the projector, then to his laptop, back to the faces watching him. None sympathetic, a few openly smirking. He disconnected the projector and spoke directly. "The original file is intact. I can circulate the correct version right now." "Yeah," Clint said, still smiling. "Do that. In the meantime, why don't we circle back to someone with a little more polish?" He nodded to the next speaker, and Dorian stepped aside, jaw clenched, heart pounding, face hot with humiliation. As he backed away, he saw one of the junior IT staff glance down guiltily, someone who had access to internal file pathways. Dorian filed the look away in his mind. By the time he returned to his desk, an email was waiting. "We'd like to schedule a feedback session regarding today's presentation delivery." The message was from HR. The meeting happened that afternoon in a room colder than usual. Christine from HR sat across from him again, hands folded, expression unreadable. "We've received a few concerns about your recent behavior," she began. Dorian leaned forward, tired but focused. "Behavior. There have been informal reports suggesting you've demonstrated tension under pressure, aggressive posture, short responses. Some staff feel you're difficult to approach." Dorian blinked slowly. "Aggressive posture?" Christine nodded solemnly, as if what she was saying had real weight. "We're placing you into a performance support initiative, just temporary, focusing on emotional intelligence and interpersonal dynamics. It's an opportunity to reflect and grow." The word grow sat like acid in his throat. He had spent months refining company strategy, mentoring junior staff, building scalable models. And now he was being sent to a workshop designed for people who couldn't control their temper, people who shouted, threatened, exploded. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He swallowed humiliation daily with steel in his spine. "Was this Clint's doing?" he asked. Christine smiled politely. "This isn't about any one individual. It's about creating a more collaborative environment. I've collaborated on every major campaign since I arrived," Dorian said. "I've never once raised my voice. This is character assassination." "Let's not escalate things," she said gently. "You're a valuable member of the team." The next day, a calendar invite labeled emotional engagement and workplace mindfulness landed in his inbox. Mandatory attendance. He sat through the session with 6 others, none from strategy, all from support roles. The facilitator spoke in cheerful cliches about breathing and empathy, but every word echoed with disrespect. Dorian didn't need lessons in mindfulness. He needed protection from the people trying to erase him. In the hallway later that week, he heard Clint talking loudly near the espresso bar. "You know, we gotta coach talent these days. Can't just let M melt under the lights." Dorian passed him without speaking. Clint caught his eye and grinned. "Hey champ, how was meditation camp?" A few people nearby chuckled. Dorian walked on. At his workstation, a sticky note appeared on his screen. "Smile more." No signature. He peeled it off and shredded it in silence. That Friday, an executive summary went out highlighting department milestones. Dorian's campaign was featured, but attributed to Clint. His name wasn't mentioned once. That night, Dorian stood alone on the building's rooftop terrace, tie loosened, the city stretching in silence beneath him. For the first time in weeks, he considered resignation, but something in him resisted. A small, quiet fury. Not loud, not violent, just firm. He wasn't going to run, not because of pride, but because they expected him to. And that alone was reason to stay. The summit, a convergence of innovation leaders and digital marketing giants, was set to highlight breakthroughs in predictive analytics and next-gen user engagement. A perfect platform for the work Dorian had pioneered. For over a year, he had refined his data-driven behavioral engagement model, molding it into a scalable platform tailored for urban market activation. It wasn't just a concept, it was tested, proven, and on the brink of becoming Strategy's defining product line. Dorian's name wasn't anywhere on the press kit. He saw the omission on a Thursday afternoon, days before the summit. He searched the company intranet for project credits, scrolled through the promotional email, and checked the internal release again. Clint's name appeared 5 times. Dorian's wasn't listed once. He sat at his desk, jaw clenched, lips pressed in a hard line, while the rest of the office buzzed with excitement over the big event. Interns hustled by with banners and printouts. Executives swapped schedules and restaurant reservations. Dorian said nothing. He requested a guest pass to attend as a stratagem representative and was granted a general admission badge. No backstage access. No speaking slot. The morning of the summit, Dorian arrived early and took a seat in the third row. The auditorium glowed with blue uplighting and soft electronic tones pulsed from ceiling-mounted speakers. Rows of influential figures, venture capitalists, CTOs, journalists, filed in, sipping espresso and scrolling through branded event apps. Clint took the stage with the confidence of a man walking into his own birthday party. He wore a slim-cut navy suit, his beard freshly trimmed, a wireless mic clipped discreetly to his lapel. He began with a joke about elevator pitches and then pivoted to the theme, how we engineered a human algorithm. The presentation slide flashed behind him. In large white font across a black screen, the Rourke framework. Dorian felt the breath freeze in his chest. The graphs, the segmentation schema, the cascading response triggers, they were his. Every line of that system, from the data prioritization tiers to the content funneling sequence, came from the whiteboards he had scribbled on during long nights alone in conference rooms. Clint presented it as if it had emerged fully formed from his own imagination. He joked about the grind of creativity, told a story about waking up at 3 a.m. with the idea, thanked the incredible stratagem team, and then clicked through a series of case studies, all built on Dorian's code. No acknowledgement, no footnote, not even a special thanks. Dorian sat motionless as the crowd applauded, many standing to shake Clint's hand afterward. A reporter leaned toward Dorian during the intermission, mistaking him for a guest. "That was something, huh?" she said. "He's got a real future." Back at the office, the fallout began. An official press release went live on Stratagem's homepage titled, "Stratagem unveils $2.8 billion strategic engine at Global Summit." The first paragraph lauded Clint's visionary leadership in building a new era of targeted analytics. The supporting bullet points outlined the product roadmap, each point lifted directly from Dorian's internal reports. Attached was a new org chart for the project's division. Clint listed as head of product innovation, followed by a team of new hires. Dorian's name didn't appear. Not in the body, not in the appendix, not even under acknowledgments. He was gone. He walked straight to HR, this time without an appointment. Christine met him with that same neutral expression, the mask of faux empathy that had started to grate on every nerve. He placed a printout of the press release on her desk. "This is my work," he said. "I built this framework. I've written every line, mapped every function, led the development. I've got timestamps, email threads, even footage of internal presentations." Christine skimmed the sheet and nodded. "We appreciate your passion, Dorian, but leadership made a decision based on organizational optics." He stared at her, mouth dry. Optics. She folded her hands. Public-facing narratives are often structured for market cohesion. Clint's role as a senior executive allows the brand to consolidate its messaging. "So erasing me from my own work is cohesive?" Christine tilted her head slightly. "I wouldn't frame it that way." "I bet you wouldn't," he said. He stood, collected his paper, and walked out without another word. For the next week, Dorian received email after email from internal contacts congratulating the team on the successful rollout. Some messages were oblivious. Others carried a thin layer of guilt. "You were probably involved at some point, right?" one read. "Either way, amazing to see it live." Dorian didn't reply. He sat through meetings where Clint repeated the same anecdotes he had told on stage, laughing about the long nights he never actually endured. In private, Dorian heard whispers. People asking why he wasn't listed. Others speculating that maybe he had been demoted for cause. Maybe he couldn't handle the spotlight, someone murmured near the elevator. He always seemed intense. On Friday, Dorian found an empty white envelope on his desk. Inside, a single printed card. "Appreciation is not guaranteed." Recognition is earned. No name, just company letterhead. He didn't bother reporting it. He just placed it in his drawer, face down, next to the note that had once read "Smile More." The annual Stratagem Solutions Gala was the event of the year, where image mattered more than function and perception trumped truth. Every inch of the Grand Marlowe Hotel ballroom gleamed under chandeliers, gold-accented trim, and glass sculptures. The crowd of executives, investors, clients, and key team members filtered in under the illusion of unity and celebration. Dorian had not planned to attend. He had no reason to celebrate, no name in the press, no recognition for the project he had built from the ground up. But when the official invite arrived, signed by the COO, with the subject line, "Your presence is requested," he interpreted it not as inclusion, but as an order. He arrived in a tailored black suit, shoes shining, his expression unreadable. The venue buzzed with laughter and champagne, the clink of cutlery, the murmurs of deals and gossip. Dorian's name tag read "Operations Guest" in a generic font, a slap in the face for a man who had once been listed as a lead strategist. An usher showed him to a table, table 19, positioned near the kitchen doors, where staff bustled in and out carrying trays and dishes. At the front, Clint Rourke sat at the head table flanked by board members and top-tier investors. His chair elevated both literally and figuratively. Dorian watched from afar, jaw set, as Clint laughed, toasted, and worked the room like a performer basking in the glow of stolen spotlight. When dinner ended, Clint rose for his keynote toast. A hush fell over the crowd as he lifted his glass, his voice amplified by the gold-plated microphone. "To the team behind the most explosive analytics breakthrough in Stratagem's history," he said, smiling wide. "The Rourke Framework, born from grit, forged in fire, and executed with vision." Applause echoed. Clint waited for it to die down before continuing. "And let's not forget, folks, every great innovation needs a little luck. And sometimes a diversity hire who doesn't get in the way." Laughter broke out, louder than Dorian had expected. The tone was casual, flippant, delivered with the air of a joke, but its sting was sharp, and its meaning clear. Heads turned, but not toward Clint. Toward Dorian. Eyes filled with amused confusion, some apologetic, some cold. Dorian didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just sat, his champagne untouched, his hands steady on the white cloth. After dessert, Clint introduced a special presentation, a curated review of internal feedback and innovation highlights. The lights dimmed, and the screen above the stage flickered to life. Near the end of the segment, a slide appeared showing an email, allegedly authored by Dorian. It was poorly formatted, but inflammatory. It contained phrases like "company's outdated leadership, toxic executive culture," and "project stolen under false leadership." A timestamp was included, a company logo, and Dorian's name in bold at the bottom. Clint clicked to the next slide with a theatrical pause. "We take pride in giving everyone a voice," he said, voice oozing condescension. "But sometimes voices go off script. We encourage innovation, not insubordination." A tense silence spread across the room. Board members whispered. A few guests looked visibly uncomfortable. Dorian stood. His voice rang clear and direct across the tables. "That email is fake." Clint turned, unfazed. "Come on, Dorian. Own it. You had something to say, right?" Dorian's face remained calm, but his blood roared beneath the surface. "I never wrote that. That's not my writing. That's not even my structure. It's a fabrication." Clint chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, IT flagged it as coming from your credentials. I mean, that's all we need, isn't it?" The crowd stirred. The moment had turned from celebration to spectacle. Dorian looked around, but no one came to his defense. No one asked for proof. No one questioned the timing. After the gala, Dorian returned to the office briefly to retrieve his bag. The building was dim, the lobby nearly empty. He swiped his badge at the security gate. Denied. He tried again. Denied. The guard checked the system and looked up, apologetic. "Says your credentials have been revoked." Dorian asked, "By who?" The guard shrugged. "Doesn't say. Just status, inactive." Dorian's phone buzzed with a new notification. A message from HR. Effective immediately, access credentials will be temporarily suspended pending administrative review. No explanation, no process, just a shutdown. The following morning, his company email was disabled. His calendar vanished. His access to the internal drive returned 403 errors. Calls went unanswered. Christine from HR finally responded hours later with a templated statement. In light of ongoing internal concerns, we ask that you refrain from entering the premises until further notice. A formal review meeting will be scheduled in due course. Dorian sat in his apartment, the blinds half drawn, the light muted, silence heavy in every corner. He stared at the fake email again, a screenshot someone had texted him anonymously from inside the company. He matched it against his writing style, his formatting. Every aspect rang false. But to the board, perception had already become fact. Clint had planted the final piece of his narrative, that Dorian was unstable, ungrateful, and disloyal. He had turned Dorian's silence into a weapon and now used it to justify his complete exile. In the days that followed, Dorian's name became synonymous with controversy within Stratagem. He heard from one remaining ally, a programmer named Anika, who messaged from a personal account. I saw the metadata on that email. It was generated from a system template. No author credentials embedded. Clint is covering his tracks. Be careful. Dorian thanked her, copied the message, and stored it. But it wasn't evidence enough. Not yet. Not to the people who mattered. He considered the legal route, drafting a complaint, building a retaliation claim. But without access to internal systems, everything would be hearsay. Besides, Stratagem had lawyers for days. He needed something bigger, something strategic. He needed to make the truth undeniable. But first, he had to endure. The formal disciplinary hearing was scheduled in a sterile conference room on the building's 4th floor, far removed from the executive offices where Dorian used to present roadmaps and forecast models. The walls were lined with generic prints of company values, words like integrity, innovation, and teamwork, all rendered in soft blues and whites that made the place feel more like a waiting room for a low-rent consultancy than the site of a man's professional reckoning. Dorian entered at exactly 9 o'clock, dressed in a tailored navy suit with every document of relevance loaded onto a secure flash drive in his breast pocket. Across the table sat Christine from HR, 2 compliance officers he had never met, and a company attorney who did not bother to introduce herself. Clint was not present. That fact alone told Dorian everything. This wasn't an inquiry. This was a verdict in disguise. Christine began with a tone of practiced neutrality. Thank you for coming, Dorian. We're here today to formally review a pattern of professional misconduct that has raised concerns about your alignment with Stratagem's values. Dorian remained silent, jaw tight, waiting. She clicked a button, and the screen behind her displayed a slideshow of alleged incidents, screenshots of system logs, email threads taken out of context, and the now infamous falsified email supposedly authored by him. These documents suggest a breach of protocol, use of divisive language, and repeated insubordination. She continued, We're offering you an opportunity to respond. Dorian reached for his drive, inserted it into the USB port, and pulled up his own slides. Time-stamped file directories, cross-reference logs, metadata audits. He explained, without raising his voice, how the internal emails had been altered, how the formatting didn't match his templates, and how multiple timestamps fell outside his working hours. If you compare the logs, he said, highlighting 2 specific entries, you'll see discrepancies that prove this data was manipulated. The attorney cleared her throat. That may be, but internal audits must be validated through compliance review, which has not occurred. Christine nodded. We appreciate your passion, Dorian. But these conversations are about trust. It's not only about facts, it's about perception. The word hit him like a slap. Perception. It was a mask that Clint had learned to weaponize with precision. By manipulating what people saw and believed, he could twist truth into insubordination, innovation into recklessness, and professionalism into hostility. And now the company was echoing him. The room made no further acknowledgement of Dorian's defense. No questions, No clarifications, just quiet note-taking and stiff nods. The hearing ended in under 30 minutes. "We'll review and respond with next steps," Christine said, closing her folder. Dorian left with a sickening sense that those steps had already been decided. By the end of that week, his nameplate was removed from his office door, replaced by one that read Open Seat Flex Staff. His email was partially reactivated, but only for general memos and non-confidential communication. He no longer received direct invites to strategy meetings. His Slack access was trimmed to a single project thread, the most irrelevant assignment the company managed, a dormant client account with no active deliverables. His calendar showed no meetings. His badge allowed access only to general areas. And his paycheck? Frozen. Not reduced, not docked, just stalled. The explanation came from HR in vague terms, pending resolution of administrative status. Dorian tried to speak to his mentor, Leonard McKnight, the VP who had once championed his rise, written his promotion review, and called him one of the sharpest minds I've seen in 20 years. Leonard now barely met his gaze in passing. When Dorian approached him in the hallway, Leonard glanced at his watch, muttered about a time crunch, and slipped away with a weak apology. The following Monday, Leonard was photographed shaking Clint's hand at a leadership summit, both men smiling in matching stratagem polos. Dorian saw the photo in the company newsletter. His chest tightened with something beyond anger. It was a hollowing sadness, a grief for the loss of loyalty he had once counted on. Words spread through the company like wildfire, not in loud declarations, but in silences, in the quiet disappearance of eye contact, in the way doors didn't open for him anymore. Junior analysts avoided his desk. Project leads stopped copying him on updates. People he'd trained and vouched for now acted like he had never existed. He wasn't officially fired, but unofficially he was done. A ghost, a risk, a name whispered only in cautionary tones. He overheard two product managers talking in the cafeteria. He must have crossed someone big. "I heard he threatened legal." "Nah, I think he just broke down." That last comment stung the most, not because it was cruel, but because it framed his silence as weakness. As if enduring humiliation with restraint meant he had cracked instead of endured. That Friday, he received a document marked confidential via inter-office courier. It was a performance development plan, an insulting checklist of mandatory tasks, peer reviews, and weekly self-awareness logs he was expected to submit to HR. Each box a bureaucratic hurdle designed not to evaluate growth, but to ensure attrition. The final line read, "Continued non-compliance may result in formal termination proceedings." He sat in the company library that afternoon, staring out the window, the city sprawling endlessly beyond the glass. He thought about the cost of pride, of dignity, of holding the line. He thought about how easily people surrendered their morals to preserve their seats at the table. How many had once nodded when he spoke, only to look away now. He could almost hear Clint's voice in his mind mocking, "Perception is power, Shields." But Dorian didn't break. Not outwardly. Not yet. He documented everything. Every slight, every email, every photo, every restricted access screen. He stored it all in encrypted backups. He wasn't done. They had tried to erase him, humiliate him, silence him. But he still had the truth. And when the time came, he would make sure it spoke louder than every lie Clint had built. He had nearly reached the corner when a deep voice called from behind him, "Mr. Shields." Dorian turned, tense. A man in his 60s, dressed in a charcoal suit with a blue cashmere scarf, stepped forward from the shadows near the building's granite columns. He stood with perfect posture, his face lined but sharp, the kind of presence that demanded respect before words were even spoken. Dorian narrowed his eyes. "Do I know you?" The man nodded slowly. "Not yet, but I've known of you for quite some time." Dorian didn't reply. The man stepped closer, his expression calm, not predatory. "My name is Victor Reddick. I'm a silent investor, one of the founding backers of Stratagem Solutions." Dorian blinked. The name wasn't unknown. It was whispered in finance circles, attached to venture capital portfolios and long silent partnerships, a ghost who had once turned companies to gold with a single backing. "Why are you talking to me?" Dorian asked, his voice even cautious. Victor studied him. "Because I've been watching. From the beginning. Not just you, but the pattern. The missteps. The corruption of your work. And the silence they've forced on you." Dorian's heart skipped. "You're telling me you've been watching this happen and did nothing?" "On the contrary," Victor said smoothly. "I allowed it to continue until they revealed the full extent of their arrogance. A lesson in exposure. But now it's time for them to see you." They walked together, slowly, past the quiet storefronts and dim city lights. Victor explained how his initial investment had secured him a permanent, if invisible, seat at Stratagem's table. He preferred to watch from the margins, allowing others to take credit while he monitored returns. But recently, those returns had become contaminated by rot, ethical rot. He saw what Clint had done, not just to Dorian, but to several others before him. Talented minds discarded, voices silenced, projects stolen. But none of them fought back, Victor said. They left, vanished, took settlements, buried their pride. You didn't. You endured. You watched. And you waited. "I didn't have a choice," Dorian said quietly. "They made sure of that." Victor stopped walking. "You had every choice. You just chose not to collapse. That's what interested me." They met again 2 days later, this time in a private suite at the top of the Palisade Tower, where Victor kept a residence. The walls were lined with old books, oil paintings, and relics of a life spent earning power without ever needing fame. Dorian came prepared, with every document, timeline, file, screenshot, and audio clip he had collected. Victor listened silently as Dorian explained the sabotage, the manipulated evidence, the exclusion from the project he had built. When Dorian finished, Victor stood and walked to a side cabinet. He opened a drawer and returned with a slim leather folder. Inside were printouts of internal memos from Stratagem's board, unpublished, confidential. "I bought these," Victor said plainly. "I own people on that board. Most investors do." Dorian read them quickly. One line stood out. Clint's visibility remained strong. Tie the product to his name exclusively. Shields is too volatile for long-term optics. Dorian felt his throat tighten. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a deliberate erasure, bought and signed off by leadership. Victor closed the folder. "We're going to turn this around," he said. But not with outrage, with precision. Over the next week, Victor funded a private intelligence team, former auditors, tech specialists, media consultants. They helped Dorian compile an irrefutable digital narrative. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. Something cleaner. A presentation. The kind Clint would never see coming. Dorian worked out of Victor's suite, building slide decks, scripting case studies, annotating timelines. Every name, every file, every instance of sabotage. The story wasn't just personal, it was systemic. It was a culture of abuse dressed in corporate polish. They planned the venue, an investor transparency summit already scheduled by Stratagem in 3 weeks. Victor, leveraging his unseen ownership, arranged for a speaker swap. "You'll present," he told Dorian, "as an independent consultant. No one needs to know who put you there until you're on that stage." Dorian didn't smile. He didn't gloat, but his spine straightened and his eyes burned with focus. He had been humiliated, erased, degraded. But now they would hear his voice, not in an email, not in a complaint, but standing, visible, undeniable. Clint Rourke arrived like a victorious general, flanked by sycophants and assistants, all projecting the confidence of a man who believed his position to be untouchable. He shook hands, exchanged jokes, posed for photos, and occasionally glanced at the schedule with a grin. The keynote slot after lunch was his. Everyone knew it. He'd prepared his usual cocktail of rehearsed anecdotes, sweeping claims, and half-truths spun into visionary prose. What he hadn't prepared for was the change made quietly behind the scenes, orchestrated by Victor Reddick. Without warning, the auditorium lights dimmed 20 minutes ahead of schedule. A curated intro video, expected to preface Clint's address, cut to black. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. The spotlight returned center stage. where a tall figure in a black tailored suit stepped forward. Dorian Shields. Alone. Calm. Resolute. The silence in the room was visceral. Faces froze mid-sip. Clint, standing backstage, stiffened. Dorian didn't wait for approval. He began. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice amplified with a clarity that cut through the silence like a blade. "My name is Dorian Shields. I am the original architect of the analytical model you know as the Rourke framework. But before we talk about truth, let's talk about silence." He clicked a button. A graph appeared behind him, live system logs, timestamp builds, and version control histories, with his credentials linked to the first 87% of the code structure. "These are not opinions," he continued. "They are data trails. Verified, authenticated, undeniable." Slide after slide followed. Emails, internal memos, calendar invites, project roadmaps, all tracing the development process directly back to him. For 14 months, I led a strategic initiative to reach underserved urban markets through adaptive behavioral modeling. I designed it, I tested it, I proved it, and then I was erased. The crowd leaned forward. Phones rose. Cameras recorded. Dorian kept his cadence steady, letting the evidence speak louder than emotion. He described the sabotage, the presentation corruption, the revoked access, the false HR allegations. Each point was supported with documentation, video clips, Slack transcripts. Then came the final blow, a side-by-side comparison of a falsified email Clint had presented at the gala, overlaid with metadata logs and a forensic breakdown. This message, he said, highlighting key anomalies, was generated internally using a stratagem template tool designed for automated alerts. It was never authored by me. It was planted. Gasps rose. Clint stood from the side curtain, visibly furious, whispering to staff. A security guard approached the stage, but paused when a second figure emerged from the shadows of the audience and stepped into the spotlight. Victor Reddick. Gasps turned into stunned whispers. Phones snapped photos. The reclusive billionaire hadn't been seen at a company event in years. Now he was here, standing beside Dorian. "I invested in stratagem because I believed in innovation," Victor said, voice firm, crisp. "Not exploitation. This man, Mr. Shields, built what others tried to steal. As of this moment, I withdraw my support from the current leadership." Effective immediately. He turned to face the crowd, his face lit by the stage lights. "There will be a restructuring. And this man," he gestured to Dorian, "will help lead it." Chaos erupted. Board members stood, arguing. Clint tried to shout over the noise, claiming manipulation, denying everything, but his voice was swallowed by the crowd. Reporters rushed to the front. Flashbulbs strobed. Dorian stood motionless amid the storm, shoulders squared, head high. He wasn't gloating. He was exposing. The following day, Stratagem's stock dipped sharply. By noon, 3 board members had resigned. Clint was placed on indefinite leave pending a full audit. An internal memo was circulated, this time with Dorian's name in bold as Interim Director of Strategic Research. An emergency board session convened in the evening, led by Victor, where new governance protocols were introduced. Dorian was asked to stay, not as a placeholder, as a builder. The board of directors convened an emergency review session, one not led by Clint or his confidants, but by Victor Reddick and an external legal firm contracted with full investigative authority. The firm, known for its discretion and ferocity, began with Clint's digital footprint. The audit team pulled server logs, access histories, document alterations, and communication trails. Dorian provided everything he had: the tampered files, fake email breakdowns, Slack messages, metadata tags, and timestamps, and watched as the specialists cross-referenced and validated every line. What they found shocked even the most cynical board members. There were multiple coordinated efforts orchestrated by Clint to block Dorian's access, including written directives to IT requesting revocation, pending leadership reassessment. Clint had personally ordered the corrupted file substitution before the board review, using his assistant's credentials. A memo surfaced, pending Clint's own style, instructing HR to monitor Dorian for aggressive behaviors and suggesting preemptive inclusion in an emotional intelligence program. Worse still, several emails between Clint and senior managers contained overtly disparaging language, referring to Dorian as optics fodder, the diversity play, and too smart to stay in his lane. The language was not only cruel, but damning. It proved intent, sabotage, systemic discrimination, and a gross abuse of leadership power. Within 3 days, Clint's executive access was permanently disabled. He was barred from entering the building and served with a formal notice of suspension pending termination. His personal assistant resigned the same afternoon, followed by 2 HR officers and a director in internal communications who had assisted in spreading false narratives. The once loyal circle that orbited Clint dissolved under scrutiny. Co-workers who had laughed at his jokes now deleted messages, scrubbed chats, and issued carefully worded statements of disassociation. Even Leonard McKnight, the mentor who had once avoided Dorian in the hallway, offered a reluctant apology via internal memo. It has come to my attention that prior assessments I endorsed were based on incomplete information. I regret any oversight that contributed to Mr. Shields' misrepresentation. Dorian read the statement without emotion. It was too late for regret. The legal team compiled their findings into a comprehensive report. Strategem's legal counsel, now realigned under Victor's directive, reviewed every page with sharp intensity. On the 9th day, Clint Rourke was officially terminated from Stratagem Solutions for misconduct, professional negligence, and deliberate sabotage of intellectual property. He was escorted from his home office by legal representatives, served with a cease and desist, and notified that pending litigation for damages and defamation was under review. The news broke publicly within hours. Business Wire, Forbes, and TechHound ran headlines like "Rourke ousted in corporate scandal," and "Silent Genius Dorian Shields reclaims vision after CEO fraud." Interviews were requested. Podcasts debated the ethical lapses in corporate hierarchy. Analysts speculated that Clint would be blacklisted across the industry for the foreseeable future. Recruiters removed his name from shortlists. PR firms distanced themselves. Invitations vanished. In the Stratagem building, the culture began to shift. Dorian was reinstated, not just with a title, but with authority. He was offered the role of Executive Director of Strategic Innovation, reporting directly to the board through Victor. He accepted with quiet resolve, declining the public statements and photo ops. He moved into Clint's old office, but left the walls bare. No ego posters, no bold statements. Just clean, focused space. The team around him changed too. Many of the toxic figures had already resigned or been reassigned. In their place came newer faces, quieter voices, people who had once been ignored or pushed aside. They gravitated toward Dorian, not out of fear, but respect. They had seen what it looked like when someone fought with truth instead of volume, with facts instead of politics. One afternoon, during a closed-door meeting with senior executives, Victor addressed the room. "Let this be a lesson," he said. "Perception is not reality. Reality is reality, and reality always surfaces." Dorian added nothing. He didn't need to. The numbers spoke now. The rebuilt project, no longer branded under Rourke, was generating serious investor interest. Clients began returning. Staff morale lifted. And for the first time in a long while, Stratagem was being talked about for the right reasons. Outside the office, Clint tried to mount a counter-narrative. He claimed betrayal, bias, revisionist history. He gave an off-the-record interview to a second-tier blog, painting himself as the victim of internal manipulation by a rogue investor and a disgruntled employee. The story gained no traction. The evidence was too overwhelming. Every attempt at a comeback only deepened his public disgrace. Within a month, he was removed from 4 advisory boards. 3 major partners dropped him from their leadership panels. His TEDx talk was pulled for review. His name became synonymous with fraud in leadership ethics forums. Dorian received emails from former colleagues at other firms, some apologizing, others congratulating him. A few simply stunned that he hadn't disappeared. "You're the example now," one message read. Proof that staying silent doesn't mean defeat. Dorian replied to only a few, keeping his words measured. He didn't want a legacy of vengeance. He wanted transformation. Months passed, and the tremors from Clint Rourke's fall slowly began to settle beneath the surface of Stratagem's rebirth. The company, once rotting from ego and silenced brilliance, had begun to heal. Its recovery was not explosive or marketed with dramatic flair. It was quiet, deliberate, and grounded in new truth. Dorian Shields, now firmly at the helm of strategic innovation, led not with bombast, but with clarity, building a culture where listening held more power than commanding. Under his leadership, the company implemented sweeping changes. Mandatory ethics training was replaced by interactive accountability forums. Project credit logs became transparent and public, and decision-making channels opened to staff across levels. Dorian removed the last remnants of Clint's era from the executive suite, not as a purge, but as a symbolic gesture that said we no longer tolerate false idols. In his place, a new mantra was etched into the glass conference wall. We do not silence, we amplify. It was a message written not just for employees, but for himself, a reminder that survival alone was never enough if it wasn't shared. But outside the high rises of Stratagem, in the world where former kings wandered after their crowns had been broken, Clint Rourke lived in a quieter realm of reckoning. After the termination and public disgrace, he withdrew from the speaking circuit and lost every board seat he once considered permanent. The home he bought in Napa was sold within a month, and his consulting offers dried up before contracts could be drafted. The name Rourke became synonymous with cautionary tales in HR webinars and business school ethics lectures. But it was not the loss of wealth that changed Clint. It was the weight of silence. In his isolation, without the applause, without the flattery, he was forced to confront the ruin he'd caused. His days were no longer filled with meetings, only memories, the laughter he once weaponized, the pride he'd mistaken for genius, the faces of people he humiliated for sport. For weeks, he ignored calls and blocked media inquiries. It was only after a former intern, one of many he'd dismissed without thought, wrote a blog post titled "The Leadership That Nearly Broke Me" and mentioned his name without venom but with painful precision, that Clint felt something shift inside him. She hadn't blamed him alone. She had pointed to a culture that let people like him thrive unchecked. That truth, not the lawsuits or the headlines, cut deepest. One afternoon, unannounced and alone, Clint walked into Stratagem's new reception hall. Security paused but did not stop him. His name had been flagged, but Victor Reddick had left a quiet instruction in the system. Let him pass, once. Clint stepped into the lobby, now redesigned with open glass and natural light, no longer cold with marble grandeur. He waited by the front desk until an assistant informed Dorian that a Mr. Rourke is here, requesting 5 minutes, nothing more. Upstairs, Dorian hesitated. He was in the middle of planning an inclusion summit, coordinating panelists, reviewing narratives of resilience. But something in the timing, the symmetry of it, made him rise and descend the stairs himself. He didn't send security. He didn't summon an audience. He met Clint in the lobby, the place where Clint's shadow had once loomed large. Clint stood when Dorian approached. His suit was less tailored, his hair slightly grayer, but the posture had changed most. No arrogance, no pretense, just the bearing of a man who knew he had lost more than titles. "Thank you for seeing me," Clint said. Dorian nodded once. "Say what you came to say." Clint took a breath. "I was wrong. About everything. I let my insecurity mask itself as dominance. I stole. I lied. I manipulated. And I convinced myself it was necessary. I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't know what to do with it. But I wanted to say to you directly that I see it now. All of it." Dorian studied him, measured the words, felt no triumph, no desire to wound. Just stillness. "You didn't just harm me," Dorian said. "You taught others how to harm by example. And that's what took the longest to fix." Clint lowered his eyes. "I know." Silence stretched between them, not heavy, not tense, just honest. Then Dorian spoke again. "You can't rewrite your past, Clint, but you can stop others from repeating it." Clint nodded. "That's what I'm trying to do. Quietly. I mentor now, under a different name. No headlines, just listening." Dorian's eyes met his. Then start there. Clint left without asking for anything. And that was the true shift, the recognition that redemption was not owed, not guaranteed, not performative. It was a path, not a prize. Months later, Dorian would read an anonymous op-ed in a business journal titled, "What I Learned from My Fall," and though it bore no byline, he recognized the voice. It was reflective, candid, and unflinching. It spoke of the cost of pride, the hunger for praise, and the emptiness of unchecked authority. It ended with a line that struck deep. Power used to drown others will eventually pull you under. Back at Stratagem, change continued. The Diversity Summit launched not just as a PR move, but as a movement, drawing speakers who had walked through their own silencing and emerged louder, clearer, wiser. Dorian opened the event with a single story, not of his downfall, but of his choice to stay, to resist disappearing. "Silence is not consent," he said. "It's a waiting room. But waiting is not weakness. And when we speak for those still silenced." The room rose in applause, not because of spectacle, but because of recognition. Years later, Stratagem would become a case study in business transformation, not for its scandal, but for its course correction. And at the center of that story, not as a footnote or caution, but as a pivot point, was Dorian Shields. Not the man who was erased, but the one who returned and rewrote the narrative. The end. If you found this story powerful, meaningful, or just compelling to follow, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like and hit that subscribe button. It helped a lot and tells me you're enjoying these narrative deep dives. What did you think about the plot twists and the way justice unfolded? Which moment hit hardest for you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're watching from and which character's journey stood out most to you. Let's talk about it.